Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Rennch. On today's show, we are going to continue to dial in the rear bumper and the back of this Porsche 911. Welcome to Rennch. I'm Michael, your host. Behind me is a 1969 Porsche 911S that had been completely gutted as a race car. I've converted it back to a Porsche 911 ST, and I'm calling it a techno mod because it's going to have all kinds of cool things like cruise control and launch control and active aero and active suspension, but you'll never know it because it'll look like a stock 911. Today I'm working on the rear bumper area. And I've just gotten back from SEMA. In fact, this is the first video I've done since SEMA. I've done a bit of work on the car. I am so happy that I did not bring the car to SEMA just because of the fit and finish of the cars that were there. I thought if I rushed this thing, it would not come out as good as I wanted it to. So since you've last seen me, I've done some work on the rear bumper. I split it into 3 pieces, as you guys might have seen in the previous episode before my little SEMA video. And I've integrated this flare on this right side. It's almost perfect. I've cut a little scallop into the bumper so I can move it in a little bit, but I've decided the next thing I'm gonna do is work on the spacing of this rear light. So we're doing this custom 3D printed 911R integrated LED looking light from my friends over at Lauren Teal. And it uses this cover plate over the rear of the car here to invisibly integrate the LEDs into this car. It's gonna look super cool when it's done. The problem I found was this. These 2 levels, even though I welded on like a 10mm piece pushing this part out, are still a little bit too far off. This thing needs to come out a little bit more than it is. So what I've done is I've gotten a little bit of brake line. This is mild steel brake line, and I'm gonna weld it right here onto this edge to hopefully give this corner a perfect flush so that I can mount this thing without it twisting, because what was happening is once this thing was welded on and once this was welded on, this was binding at the bottom because it wasn't parallel all the way across. So what I'm trying to do here is make this point parallel, and this point parallel. So I have 3 good spots to weld this light onto. So that's gonna be the next thing we do, is just weld this little piece on. All right, so this thing looks so much better now. It's flush all the way around the outside, and I'm really excited about how that looks. It's exactly what I was hoping for in that it completely evens out this curve instead of having a bind at the bottom. So that was a good fix. So to reiterate, when I was at SEMA, one of the things I really noticed about these cars was how beautiful and perfect the gaps were on all of them. And gaps being the interfaces between like the bumper and the body, or the doors and the body. And that's when I realized I had a lot more work to do on this thing. And it was well worth putting the time and effort in now, so that when the thing is in paint, you go, wow, that is a beautiful, cohesive package. So what I've done here is I've put this one side, this flare matches the ST flare exactly. And I had to, weld it on from the inside, basically, fiberglass and get it all dialed. I think it looks great. It came out awesome. And the next thing I've done is I put some slots here in the fiberglass, and that's to help bring it in to match the contour of the fender. Now I have to make sure the fore and aft is perfect. And once that's done, I'm gonna weld these little tabs on the inside of my new welded on quarter panels, and then give them a point to attach to the bumper here so it holds that exact position. Once that's all dialed, I will then focus on getting this side perfectly flush with the other side, and we should have a lovely rear bumper fit. I'm gonna have to slot these holes a little bit so that I pull the bumper back just a couple of millimeters to make sure that this interface is the right thing. I'm not super worried about it because when I'm done, even if this thing's got a big, long, elongated slot on it, I can always epoxy a washer in there and fix it right where it needs to go, and then I'll be good to go. So this is perfect. I've got a little bit of wiggle room here just to tighten it down and make it perfect when it comes time to mount it, but really, really good. So I've got the passenger side super dialed. It looks great. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I've got to duplicate the entire thing on the driver's side. I've got to weld this little tab on. I've got to drill the holes to mount the bumper. I've got to cut the relief cuts in the bumper. At that point, I can mount the fiberglass flared end and then strap it together before I fiberglass the inside. What I'm looking for here is for this plane to be perfectly flat and for this plane to be perfectly flat. Here's what I know. I know I'm going to be grinding this down from the outside so I can put some fiberglass filler on there. And then this part is all the same. Like I really kind of grind it out and I'll grind this thing. There's a kind of a big lip right here. I'm not super worried about it because the fiberglass filler is going to fill in all of this gap. But I am concerned about how this bottom line lines up. I'm concerned about how this top plane especially lines up with the flare. And then from the side, I want to make sure it looks flat, which it does. And I want to make sure that as I go in, I have the opportunity to blend this thing flat with the fender, which I do. I'm going to fiberglass it from the inside so that I have some structural integrity between the old piece and the bumper. Part of the challenge here is that even though these are both fiberglass Porsche, ST or RS bumpers, they don't actually have the same profile. The profiles themselves are slightly different. You can see, especially in here, that this cuts in a little bit more. I mean, you're going to get different stuff from every manufacturer. But the idea here is if I can blend all this with some fiberglass, by the time I get done smoothing it and fixing it on the inside, you'll never know. Like it'll just blend seamlessly. Okay, so if you don't have a ton of experience with epoxy and fiberglass and that kind of thing, hopefully this will be a nice little primer for you. I've got just a few things here in the garage that I think are really helpful. Number one, nitrile gloves. These I got from Harbor Freight. These are the 5mm gloves. You can definitely get thicker if you want to. You can definitely get thinner. I do find that these are a nice little compromise between the two. Without gloves, it can get really sticky really fast, and that can be a bit of a problem. And it's always nice to wear gloves around fiberglass because it can get really itchy, and especially the dust get on your skin, and not great for you in general. Always nice to have some lacquer thinner around in case you do get some epoxy or fiberglass resin on stuff. You don't want that. And ideally, you pour as much resin as you need for whatever task you're doing. Otherwise, you end up with a little resin coaster like this at the bottom of the gig. So the first thing I tend to want to do is cut my fiberglass out. This is the long strand fiberglass. In fact, I just got another whole batch of this from Amazon for like 15 bucks for a gigantic piece of it. But I'm going to cut myself, I don't know, 6 to 10 strips of this stuff right now. And you want to do it beforehand because you don't have a lot of working time once the epoxy resin starts going. Like, you know, you've got a couple minutes of working time before it starts getting hardened and it turns into like a gelatinous thing, and we don't want that. So we want to make sure that we have, you know, especially if you have a weird shape, you're going to want to cut the fiberglass to that shape before you do anything, before you even touch any resin. And, you know, because I'm doing a bumper, I want this thing to have like a lot of layers to it. I want this thing to be really solid by the time I take those straps off on the other side, because there's a whole part B to this once the fiberglass has dried at least well enough on the other side. So I have here a pile of strips that I can use. I will put those over by the part now. You also want to have a supply of these little chip brushes. These are the 1-inch kind. I get them at Harbor Freight. They're like 59 cents each or something like that. Every time I go to Home Depot, I ask if I can have a few stirring sticks, and you can just do that in the paint department. So if you don't have measuring cups like you would need in any sort of shop, this is a Kirkland brand solo cup looking thing. I have a giant pile of these. These are 240 extra strong premium heavyweight plastic cups. Why we care are these little pointers that go down the edge of the cup. I took my measuring cup and I poured exactly 4 ounces into this thing, and 4 ounces hits the exact tip of these things coming down. So you know that you have 4 ounces of resin when you pour it to the tip of this cup. Why does it matter? Well, these are 10 drops per ounce of the liquid hardener per resin. So I know that if I pour 4 ounces in here, I need 40 drops of this liquid hardener. And then if I want things to accelerate a little quicker like I do now, I can put 3 or 4 or 5 extra drops in there, which means it's going to go off a little bit quicker. It's going to actually harden a little quicker if I have other things to do. One tip I heard recently, which I thought was pretty good, was once you've put the hardener in the cup and you've stirred it, pour all of it into another cup, because sometimes some of the resin gets on the side of the cup and it doesn't get in the hardener in it, and then it doesn't cure as quickly as you'd want, or it stays uncured. So this way all the stuff that's mixed goes into the next cup, and you know that that is all cured and has the hardener in it. So I'm going to move this whole operation near the part because I want to be as quick as possible when I apply these things. I'm going 45 on this. It's actually pretty thick out of the gates for some reason. Maybe I got old resin, but okay. Here's one thing to do here. So we're going to start with dabbing on the part itself. We're going to make sure that the part itself has some resin on it, like all over it. I want to try to keep one like dry hand. You never go sideways. You always just push with the bristles, and you're just trying to soak them into the resin that you already poured. And once it gets clear, then you know you can move on. Hey dudes, next day, I gotta tell you, the daylight savings time is for the birds. I knew I had a lot of grinding and sanding to do today, and I did not want to, you know, wake the neighbors at 5:30 p.m. Anyway, this thing is super solid at this point. Sorry, Ben. This thing's super solid at this point. We are good to go. It is time to pull the straps off. Now we are, for the most part, completely lined up the way we want to be. You can see there's a bit of a ridge right here. This is even, this is even, to an extent. It's a little bit inside, but it's okay. And this is flat. All right, time to clean this thing up a little bit and cut some grooves for the filler. So for this, I'm using fiberglass filler, and I'm going to dilute it a little bit with some fiberglass resin. I hope this is helpful, by the way, as a kind of a more tutorial second half. So if you guys ever have to do something like this, you're not too intimidated by it. So this stuff is Bondo, but it's got short strand fiberglass woven into it. It's super strong. And I'm going to just give this thing a little "how's your mother" of fiberglass resin. These things are great. Also a great tip, you can get, I think, 20 of these for just a couple of bucks at Harbor Freight. You can actually physically feel how warm it gets, too. It's crazy. Yeah, should be good. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. It's always ugly before it's pretty, but that first round is great. We are now ready for the second round. I'm hoping it's the final round, but experience tells me I probably have 2 more to go. This one I applied a little bit smoother. I may actually end up just hand sanding this whole thing, but we will see once it dries how straight it is. And I start hitting it with like a straight edge or a nice block sander. Anything low will show up, and I'll have to touch it up. So as I suspected, I'm going to have to do one more round of filler here, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. What I'm going to do right now is actually work on fitting the bumper to the body. I've got 2 holes drilled in the body, and to make sure that this thing flows well, I've got to cut some relief cuts here and then on the top side of the bumper. And what that does is it allows the thing to move in easily to where it needs to be. Once I've cut the relief cuts on this thing, the bumper will just like beautifully mold into the car. And I'll drill the holes to mount it in the car, then fiberglass from the inside before I'm able to do the final fitment, final fiberglass, final filler, and then this thing will finally be done. All right, so now this thing really freely wants to move in and out. Woo-wee! That looks awesome. Awesome, awesome, freaking awesome. Oh my God, it's so flat and great and perfect. It's so awesome, Mr. Ben. Yeah. Good. Well, predictably, this side came out a little better than the other side, but I'm really psyched about each side. I think they both look fantastic. The bumper's really tight, so I put a lot of work into trying to make a really tight fit. And it's also adjustable. The one thing I'm going to have to do to this one and this side is somehow get this to twist a little bit in. And that'll be, I don't know what I'll do there, but I mean, this is it. We're 99% of the way there. All holes are drilled. All I have to do now is re-fiberglass these inside parts and just patch them up. And then I have a completely perfectly done rear bumper. I will spare you guys that. Well, as a lot of these projects do, this thing spanned a few days' time, but I couldn't be happier with the fit. I think it looks fantastic. I hope you guys think the same. Still waiting on my 3D printed parts here for the lights, but once they're in, we're pretty much set for the whole rear end of this car. I've already started working on the next project, which is to finish dialing in the roll cage on the inside of the car. That'll be probably the next video. This thing's almost done, but I still have to cut the holes for the exhaust to pop out here, and then the 2 turbos to be there and there. So that'll be exciting. I've got some modeling I'm doing in Fusion 360 for those pieces. So that's gonna be really cool. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching as usual, and have yourselves a great day. We'll see you in the next video.